Welcome back to Shit Creek Survivors. We share real stories of people getting stuck up Shit Creek, the paddles they use to get out, and hope for anyone stuck in their own Shit Creek right now. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at your life and wondered, why do I keep reacting this way? Or why do I feel like I'm carrying something I can't explain? A lot of the time, the answer goes back further than we realize. It actually goes back to our childhood. Today's guest, Richard Becker, grew up in poverty, instability, and emotional neglect. But what's powerful about his story is how those early experiences shaped his identity and how he eventually learned to break free from them. This conversation is about trauma, but more importantly, it's about what it actually takes to heal from it. Let's get into it. Richard, thank you so much for being here on Shit Creek Survivors. If you would introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself before the creek.
Hey, Cameron. Actually, I'm going to have to do this a little bit differently because I was born right into the creek. Right
Okay,
out of the
okay.
box. Yeah.
I like it.
So, but I'm happy to tell you about it. So, originally I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay.
I was born to 17-year-old parents
Okay.
who really didn't know what was going on in their lives because they were so young. And in the late 60s, like that wasn't a time to be, unwed parents. They did
Okay.
do the shotgun wedding just before I was born.
Okay.
But unfortunately, and then when I was born, I was actually born with club feet, which is why right out of the
Okay.
box, I was in the creek,
Okay.
because that actually helps shape you even as an infant. Like people don't realize this, but you take crawling out of the package. You put casts on the kid because what they do to correct it at the time, it was actually cutting edge surgery. So instead of a surgery, what they would do is they would slowly manipulate your feet using casts.
Yeah.
So through my entire infancy, I'd cast, like sometimes I would go from almost away from my feet all the way to my hips to correct the feet.
Wow.
And so they had
Wow.
to be continually spread out. And it wasn't comfortable, obviously. I don't remember the pain, but
Right.
it was something that kids have, that it's like that. But at the
Yeah.
same time, they were really struggling because they were so young and really probably the wrong people to be together.
Okay.
So within 2 years of the time I was born, my father was killed. Biological father was killed in a car accident, um, and taken out of the picture.
I'm sorry.
And that's okay. And there's like a lot of questions about that, which we can touch base on later on in the
Okay.
program. Um, and as a result, my mother shifted to be with my grandparents. That was
Okay.
sort of an at-risk, household as it was. Um, but she actually left me there and she started to go out and do her thing to sort of find herself, if you will. So
Okay.
she had different opportunities to go travel, trying to find herself and get her life in order.
Okay.
Um, initially. So I was actually raised for the first 10 years of my life by my grandmother, who
Okay.
at the same time was actually struggling with cancer. So during the entire time she was raising me, she was suffering from cancer. So the idea of cancer
Wow.
and so that somebody was going to die or not be around was like imprinted into my being as
Wow.
a kid. So I had a lot of things going on. So just as I was growing up, um I was in this at-risk household. We were actually we were very poor, although there was a small paradox to it, which I could talk about another time, but there was a small paradox. But for the most part, we were poor, inner city Milwaukee. Like if you look at the railroad tracks, we were literally one street over on the railroad tracks, as the saying goes, on the wrong
Got
side.
it.
We were on the right side, but only one right side over.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we were. So I was growing up with this stigma of not having any parents in a sense, being raised by grandparents. All my clothes were, hand-me-down clothes. I didn't even know what new clothes were.
Right.
We had red tickets and blue tickets at the school cafeteria. I was getting the red ticket, which designated you as somebody who couldn't even afford the 30-cent lunch.
Okay.
Um, and you end up getting, even as a child, not just from adults, but from other people, where you start to receive all these labels of like, who
Mm-hmm.
are you? And you try to find your own sense of worth, but you really aren't equipped to do that in those particular ages.
Right.
So I leaned heavily into what would later be called an illusion of what my biological father was, which is actually, it was more closer to the truth of what he was.
Okay.
But it was told later on, I'd be told it was an illusion. So, but I gravitated toward that. Like I was told he did judo, so I was interested in that, karate or judo. I was told that he did art. I was very much into art. I tried to gravitate to like little pieces of things that I could grab onto, activities and behaviors, rather than actually developing any sort of sense of self. Because
Got
I
it.
was also receiving all these labels like, "Why don't you have a father? Why do you have to wear funny shoes all the time? You probably aren't very athletic, even though I could do." Plenty of things that a kid could do. Why
Yeah.
don't you have, proper clothing? And why are you, all this kind of stuff. And even by the third grade, I really didn't even develop a sense of how to read, which was my grandmother actually caught me, and that was like actually I think one of the pivotal points in my life, because I know we're going to talk about like how do you get out of
Hmm.
this kind of thing. I think even then there was like a small little pivot, and I think you do that throughout your life. There's like little steps that you're going to be able to climb, and one of them was is that she noticed I couldn't read in the third grade, and rather than have the public school system fail me forward, because I was definitely being failed forward. In fact, even in my elementary school, we were actually put in this a section called the barracks for
Okay.
second and third grade. And it was called the barracks because that's where all the minority kids went, and they honestly didn't care if you learned. So when I received my spelling book, if I wanted to draw on it, that was perfectly okay. You could do what you want. If you want to spend most of the day doing bulletin boards, that's okay too, as long as you're doing something. So I literally
Right.
couldn't read. My grandmother did intervene on that point, and took me out of that school and sent me to a Catholic school,
Okay.
just for a year. And they were the first people to start to undo, and we're going to talk a lot about labels. They were one of the first people to undo at least some labels. They said you're not dumb. You're not a kid that can't be educated. What you
Hmm.
actually are is somebody who is very good in math, which they didn't know, and you're not very good. Obviously, you aren't very good in reading. So we're going to start to split up your educational track so that you're getting the extra help that you need to learn how to read. And you're going
Good.
to start to receive, we're going to put you in an advanced math class, which was actually very stressful for me because I had never been challenged. But then
Right.
that started to challenge me so I could start to slowly climb out of like some of the early traumas that I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and throughout the entire time, my mother wasn't there, and I guess there was some psychological things going on in the background too. There were
Yeah.
points when I started to call my grandmother mother, and there was some upheaval in the household that shouldn't be done. So then it had to
Okay.
be re-explained. There was a time when she was looking to secure custody and just raise me as her own child,
Hmm.
which my mother, even though she was away, fought back against and stopped that from happening.
Okay.
And the whole time she was like, again, struggling with cancer. It's not to say like my entire childhood was bad. It wasn't.
Right.
Some of my best memories were actually go along with the paradox because while they were poor in Milwaukee, they were able to manage to hold on to a family cottage up in the North Woods. So that's where we'd go during the summer because my grandfather was a seasonal worker. So when
Got
he
it.
wasn't working, we would go up there for at least a month during the summer. And that's where most of my childhood joys were because we were away from the city and away from this kind of thing that I had to deal with on a regular basis.
Right.
Um, and that's just sort of the way you grow up, and that kind of like sets the stage of like who you are. I think I used to watch television quite a bit too because although I did go outside and do plenty of things and did Boy Scouts and they got me involved the best they could. There was a little bit of disconnect because I was always like ridiculed in the areas I was because of the shoes or I was different or I didn't have parents and all these things they was constantly resurfacing. Or if I went to a birthday party, we didn't have the the nice gift. We had the cheapest gift that we could have because when it was my gifts, they were usually cheap gifts too.
Mm.
We just didn't have the money to do it.
Right.
And I don't know, you just spend your whole time in that period. Um, and then I think you kind of set that foundation and that's your expectation. And throughout it all, I don't think I ever developed a sense of who I was, other
Right.
than borrowing like little bits, even from television. So I would watch a lot
Hmm.
of World War II movies, and the people who were like heroic or a John Wayne type character, I'd really
Yeah.
identify with those because I really didn't have a father. I had my grandfather there, but he was a male figure, but he wasn't a father figure, and he wasn't
Right.
there a lot because of when he was there, he was working.
Hmm.
Um, I think that just kind of shapes you like as a person, even though you don't even have a shape yet.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
100%. Labels affect you. They
And
do. I
yeah.
have ADD, and when I was a little kid, I hated being the one who had to go get the medicine. You know what I mean? Because now
Mhm.
I was identified as the one who has to go get medicine at the nurse's office, and I hated it. You know what I mean? And people label you as, oh, you're the kid who takes the medicine now, and you're like, what does that matter? You know, I'm still the
So
person I was yesterday. So yeah, and if
and
trusted
you
adults,
become comfortable in it of all the labels. Now, I will say my grandmother, she doted on me. She loved me. I mean,
mhm,
in a very nice way. My aunt said, "Hey, Rich," and there's a little irony here. She said, "Hey, the sun rises and sets on you, according to your grandmother. Like she loves you that much."
yeah,
And I didn't know that till much later. The irony was the first time I heard that. It wasn't the first time I heard it. It was actually from my mother, who I'll get into the transition that I went through at about 10. It was actually, she said it the opposite way. She said, "Yeah, the sun always rose and set on you."
yeah, yeah,
A completely different kind of answer where you were spoiled, and that's kind of what happened. So my grandmother was certainly dying of cancer, and they couldn't allow my grandfather to raise me on his own. It just wasn't possible. So the big question in the family became, what are we going to do with Richard? And he's struggling in all these little areas, and what are we going to do with him? I used to get into fights a lot and things like that because that's, you lash out, or if people tease you about it on the play. That's why I was in the barracks
right,
part. In first grade, I wouldn't accept like somebody teasing me in a line, and I didn't know how to communicate properly, so I would lash out, which is a lot of times what people do.
yeah,
Um, so when it was decided, when everybody knew my grandmother was dying, it was decided that something had to be done with me, and multiple people in the family all took some thought, including my aunt, who I was raised with. She was almost like an older sister for a little part of this time.
okay.
She was like a second year college student when this came up. So there was no way that
Oh,
she could she really wanted to take me. And just the fact that this conversation was happening should set the stage of where I was going to end up,
mhm,
for the next 8 years of my life, which was, it ended up being decided that I would go ahead and live with my mother, um, a half sister, and this new man that she had married, who he was a good guy. I
okay,
can't have anything to say about him. But that actually ended up becoming a really terrible thing because her whole idea, even though I didn't have an identity, her whole mantra was the fact that she was going to destroy the identity I have and replace it with a new identity that she felt was merited. And a big
wow,
impetus to this identity she wanted to create was to make sure that I was nothing like my biological father, because he, according to her, was an evil, heartless person,
right,
who was a deadbeat, probably committed suicide, not a regular traffic accident. And I was learning all this at like 10, 11, 12, 13 years old,
wow,
at a time where I think you're just really starting to do that. And then I was constantly told I was just like it. You do this because of your father. You do this because of him. So I was in his image, and I was a horrible person,
yeah,
who
I'm
was
so s
spoiled by my grandmother.
so your mom couldn't basically separate the 2. She
No. And she a lot of times would target, and she didn't know how to raise a child. Now, in fairness, like, I don't have any animosity toward her, and we've
right,
redefined the relationship over the years. I think people should know that. But at the same time, in that moment of time, she was definitely not equipped to take on a 10-year-old child when she was just learning how to take care of a 3-year-old
yeah,
child. Um, and so she wanted to use a very heavy, all her strategies were like heavy. If she didn't like certain behaviors, everything was based on a punishment. And so this actually became, I'm an author, and some of this actually became, I actually inserted it into, like, it's not autobiography, but I inserted some of this into a book that I wrote, my first
right,
debut novel, that was called Third Wheel. I actually inserted some of this in it, and some of it was so not good that some people actually, when I had a beta reader read it, she said, "You have to take, like, this part, you have to downplay it a bit because nobody's gonna believe it." And the thing that she said
oh,
about that was, just to give you an idea of some of the abuses that occurred, and some people will say, "Not too bad, I guess," but, so once I put a knife away dirty in a drawer, and I was put on restriction for a month in my room with nothing in it, was the punishment for that. So it was literally solitary confinement
wow, how
for a
old?
13-year-old. Oh, about 13. Or not even, because I was that must have been, I was about 11 or 12, yeah.
A continuous month where
Yeah, it was a continuous I could come out for the bathroom and to eat dinner. And the reason there was nothing in the, bedroom was, and I had to really put this in the book, I had to stage it a lot more. So in real life, the whole thing was, is she had set up this scenario where she said, "If you put one knife away dirty, like even one, you're going to be on restriction for a month. That's what she said. And, I was terrified because I already knew this battle with the dishwashing, right? Because
I was gonna say that. This sounds like a setup for
it was a setup. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. And so she had kind of said that, like, if I find even one knife, you're going to be on restriction for a month. And I'm like,
Uh,
okay. So I was like extremely careful, putting everything away because I was
yeah,
terrified because I already knew what it meant to be getting in trouble.
yeah.
And so she took, so she came in to inspect my cleanup of the kitchen, and she looked in the drawer, and I'll never forget this because she went, "What is this? What is this? That's a water spot. How could you not see that? How'd you put this away like
Wow.
that?" And she says, "Now I have to do what I said I was going to do. You're going to be on restriction for a month in your room." And because I was traumatized, I mean, I because I still was kind of a fighter, so I decided to push back, and I said, "I don't care. You can go ahead and put me in the room for a month you want. I'll read books, I'll draw, I'll do this." I told her everything I was going to do. And she said, "Well, we'll see about that. I'm taking it all out."
Oof.
And that's why. So it kind of went in a progression where she felt challenged and therefore she had to do that. But that wasn't the extent of it. Like it was kind of a constant thing to have that, like anytime, what I was learning from her was that love was conditional. And I didn't even have an identity yet other than the fact now I was this bad kid. That love was conditional because anytime you didn't do something, it would be, uh, it was a lot of times there was the room restriction, not always with nothing in it. That wasn't always the case, but there'd be that or the silent treatment for a month. And the silent treatment always included public embarrassment because if we went over to someone's house, it'd be like, "Oh, I have to ask Jim to ask Richard because I'm not talking to him for this month." And
Um,
things like so that you had that along with it. Or she would put signs on the bathroom, whether it was clean or dirty. "This is where pigs go, to the bathroom," things like that. And it was just like a constant thing. And even when it came to artistic talent, if I was drawing a picture once and I just showed her because I was hoping for affirmation or her to be proud. And she said, "I'm going to show you something." I said, "What?" So she stepped away for a couple hours and came back in. She drew this recreation of a Rockwell's self portrait and showed it to me and said, "If you can't do that, you're not an artist. You're just wasting your time."
wow.
So even that part of the identity was like starting to shift and go away.
So it
And
was
this
like
was
almost
just like a continual.
suffocating growth. It was like,
Exactly.
wow. Yeah, that's unfortunate.
And after a while, and then my stepdad was kind of out of the picture on this. He was a fine guy, but he wasn't somebody who he was a little bit neglectful in his parenting. Like he was more like, "Let the kids do what they want. I don't want to get involved." But part of it wasn't necessarily just him. It was the fact that she did tell him on multiple occasions that "this is my kid, must not forget that."
Got it.
So even when I
Yeah.
refer to him as a stepfather, I was actually never adopted or anything like that. I
Mhm.
didn't take his last name, and that was just to honor him a little bit. When I was 18, I just had a name change. I didn't actually take. I was never adopted, so that was kind of
Right.
Um, so I don't, fault him for that. He was powerless to be able to do anything in many cases, and I guess he did stand up for me on occasion. But
Mhm.
this was continuing. Not to say everything was bad all the time. There were plenty of moments in there where we had what seemed like a normal relationship, but it also was a household that was very chaotic. So I moved from this poverty thing to sort of like a lower middle class environment.
Okay.
And that was part of and actually even the transition, come to think of it, I can't believe I left that out. So this transition that I went through from one house to the other, once it was decided I go with my parents, was not a straightforward, let's explain it to you. It was actually a scheme where they said, we're going to, we're going to have you visit your mom and stepdad for a month.
Mhm.
That's how that was set up. Or no, it was actually over the summer. So I said, "Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll visit them for the summer, sure." And all of a sudden, I was exposed to a giant color television because we only had a small black and white one in the other apartment. Or you don't have to go to church anymore if you don't want to. We're going
Right.
to buy you some tennis shoes, even though maybe you should be wearing corrective shoes, but we think you've outgrown that. Um, let's go get you some. They weren't great clothes, but let's get you some new clothes. And we're going to move into an apartment. You're going to have your own room for the first time in your life. And
Mhm.
so there were treasures too.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you were warned sometimes about, right? When it comes to spiritual stuff, that you have to be careful of these creature comforts that you're invited into, because that's part of the
Yeah.
trap. And that was to ease my mind. So at the end of the summer, it was like, well, actually, we'd like you just to stay here. What do you think about that? And I was kind of like, okay, I guess I could stay here, if that would help out and everything like that. But that I didn't realize that was it. There was no going back. You couldn't change your mind.
Uh,
And even when I was, there came a point where I did want to change my mind. It was made very clear to me that all the family I was connected to was no longer really part of my life, that they were busy. And if they weren't busy, they would have taken me. So I was going to be here now. And that's just the way it was. And my mother became a conduit to all the other family members so that she could kind of control the narrative in the life
mhm.
I had both inside the house and outside the house. So it
Yeah.
was kind of disruptive, because prior at my grandmother's house, that was, even though they were poor, that was the center of activity where all family members, and it was a larger family, would come home. In fact,
Mhm.
I even had a couple cousins that were the same age.
Yeah.
So this is sort of how I grew up during that period of time.
Yeah.
Um, they did actually take me once to a psychologist, because they thought, I had this, because they thought maybe there was something wrong, because I would be angry about, especially after my grandmother did die.
Yeah.
They didn't understand why I was so angry about it, even though it was like losing a mother.
Yeah. You
Although
loved her dearly.
it was dismissed as mother because it was your grandmother. Kind of a weird dynamic, right?
Right. Yeah. And
And
confusing.
yeah, and so so I was angry, and occasionally I would lash out. So they took me to a psychologist. And then after the psychologist talked to me a couple times, they said, well, I think I've determined is that what we need to do is not just have counseling for Richard, but this really needs to be family counseling. And they said, no, we're out. And that was the
Right.
end of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I was all for that, because I was like, well, yeah, I don't want to go there.
Mhm.
Sure. And that was the only time that there's any solidarity, is when there was another, perceived enemy of whatever was going on.
Mhm.
And that's the household I grew up in. I learned to escape by going to my friend's house next door when I had a friend, and spending as much time there as possible.
Right.
The escapism on the front end was Dungeons and Dragons. On the back end, it was whatever was in the liquor cabinet
Yeah.
at his parents' house. And ironically, his house was set up in such a way where we could have literal parties over there, and somebody coming to the front door would never know, because everything was
Oh.
happening in the back. And as long as you didn't go out in the backyard, you're okay. Um, that then I kind of from that actually that was a rough group. I kind of ended up escaping that group because they were extremely rough. But I still ended up, from that day forward, I was like really probably 13, 14 years old. I was a drinker from that time on.
Really? Yeah.
Um, yeah. And once I
Did you
started
find
working as an escape, I used that as an escape. I was working at a fast food restaurant, and you make friends like that. And so all my friends, especially in a place like Las Vegas, were drinkers. And
Yeah.
we would drink. That's what we do, is we would do a lot of different things, like play volleyball or go to the lake and jump off cliffs and things, like fun things like you would expect kids in Vegas to do. But at the same time, um, it always involved alcohol, because that's
Right.
what that was kind of our game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would work and drink, and that's kind of how I was going through life. And what was kind of interesting was some of the better foundational stuff that I had learned from 1 to 10, or 0 to 10. I actually erased completely from my memory, because I was raised in such an awful manner. I actually subconsciously believe that. And when it's alcohol induced, you start to erase that. And you just know
Mhm.
yourself from the kind of person you are, which is, hey, you're kind of a bad kid.
Yeah.
And I still had a low self-esteem, and I still had to deal, with some other things. And of course, I picked up smoking and other vices like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Was there ever a point where, like, you felt you were labeled as a bad kid, so you're like, "Fine, I'll be a bad kid."
yeah, in fact, some of the punishments that she used to talk about when I was in by the time I was in my 20s, we would joke about it,
Yeah.
like openly joke about it, like, oh yeah, like Richard was such a bad kid that we had to do this. Like, isn't that funny?
No, it's not funny.
Yeah. Well,
It's
I learned later
not.
on, that, well, what changes it, one of the things that changed it for me later on, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but what was having my own kids, and I wasn't, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's when that's when I woke. That almost was a little wake point there to say this was not right. Like the
Yeah.
things that was happening was not right.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of gaslighting on, like my entire history had been rewritten in terms of what, even the people I trusted, like my grandmother. So one of the things was when we shifted households and it was decided I was going to stay there, as we went back to get my things, and I was allowed to take, it's supposed to be, I was allowed to take three things um, from one house to the other house. So I picked my three things, which isn't a lot, but they
Right.
took a whole U-Haul full of stuff, which actually I found out later was my stuff. Like, so a lot of it was the thing. So they just didn't, I just never got that stuff. And what she had said is that my grandmother had given it away in yard sales and things like that once I was gone,
Oh,
because she had to clean out the house. And so it was like, so even that was kind of like a breakdown of trust that I had, even with the one person that actually she gave me unconditional love despite her circumstances.
hmm.
Um, and then, so yes, you start to believe that you're a bad person or a bad kid. I wasn't a dumb kid by that time. We came to Vegas by way of Minnesota. So from the Catholic school, I went to Minnesota school system, which actually at the time, I don't know about today, but at the time it was pretty solid. It was way ahead of the rest of the country.
Okay.
So that really shored me up. By the time I came to Las Vegas, um, that was a little bit of a shock because they had what was called sixth grade centers. And so that
Hmm.
meant, so all the kids from the poor side of town would be bussed in for all years except sixth grade. You'd be bussed to the poor side of town, where all their schools had been converted into sixth grade centers. That doesn't exist anymore, thank goodness,
Yeah.
because they believe now that it's better to raise kids in their community than shipping them off all the time.
Yeah.
And so I came in like halfway through sixth grade, and I was going from like the Midwest to Vegas is really like a time warp, because the Midwest is like 10 years behind the West Coast.
Right.
Right. So I was
Yeah.
different again. And I had glasses now. And I was kind of lanky and skinny. And I was even teased by my folks about how skinny I was. And there
Hmm.
was like literally nothing I could do wrong. When I started to brush my hair, it'd be like, oh, you're so vain. Why do you care?
Right.
Because I also did that. One household was a clean cut, maybe a little bit more like it is right now. But when I moved in with my parents, my hair was down to my shoulders.
Hmm.
It was like, so it was like going from the great generation to hippies without pot. That's really what it was like.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. uh, there was even I even remember a New Year's Eve when they had friends over, and us in, like, me and my sister and all their drunk friends were doing rings around the kitchen and living room. It was just pandemonium. So those are the happy times, and then it
Yeah.
was like, and then I had to clean up after that. So then there was
Yeah.
the bad times on a regular basis. Um, and then, so anyway, so that's what like Vegas was like, and then Vegas, it just kind of got a little bit worse from there. One of the other things, the interesting things, and I actually put this in my book, that they did, is I had done something that they didn't like. I wasn't watching my sister when I should have been. I had let her go out, and then I went over to my friend's house, and she had caught me. She meant to catch me. She told me she was going out. She was never going out. So she right
Hmm.
away knew I went over to my friend's house. So when she came to catch me, um, she said, "Don't worry about it. We're gonna go on a trip tomorrow, and I think everything will fall into place." And I said, "Okay." And the trip we were gonna go on to was, which a lot of people do out of Las Vegas, is you go to Mount Charleston to kind of like, cool off and whatnot. But one
Yeah.
of the things that they have there is they also have a youth juvenile detention center. So that's actually where she took me. And she told me all about the detention center and all the horrible things that were going to happen inside the detention center. And that if I crossed her again, that's where I was going to end up.
Wow. Nothing like
Right.
being threatened by your mom.
Yeah, I know.
Gosh.
It was kind of on a regular basis. And like I
Yeah.
said,
It's
work later on ended up being an escape. You work late shifts, and then you work late enough and get a friend to drive you home, so they don't really know like when you got off of work. So if I worked a
right.
6 to 10 and my friend was getting off after close at 1,
Hmm.
and then we could go find a party on the weekend till 4 or 5, I was down for that.
Right.
And that's kind of how I lived my life for a long time. And then there were other periods where I just moved out of the house and just stayed at one of my friend's house, where her parents were gone for a month, and she's just a friend, but they were gone for a month.
Mhm.
So I lived there for a month, just to get out of the situation environment I was in because the safest thing for me to do was to be away as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I did try to do other things, which was always like, I don't know, they're like little lifelines that you get kind of along the way, and you really kind of have to pay attention to them.
Mhm.
Um, I had a seventh grade teacher who noticed when it came to the book report, I picked the thinnest because I didn't love reading. I picked the
Right.
thinnest spine I could find, to do, and got it done in a week. It was easy.
Yeah.
um, and he challenged me and gave me this book called Dune by Frank Herbert. Um,
Oh,
and I think one of the things that hit me was this whole idea. Actually, there's a lot of some parallels in it, in that Paul Atreides goes from a water world like the Midwest to the desert like Las Vegas. Atreides, and
yeah.
yeah,
Good point.
and that's kind of where I was doing the same thing, and it talked about sleeper will awaken, and things like that were like really etched into this book. Not that I thought I was going to be like this hero or anything, but it gave me comfort and like saying like, wait, maybe I can get out of it. Maybe something can happen to get me out of this. It would take a lot
Right.
longer than that.
Yeah.
That's one of those little lifelines you get along the way. And sometimes, she didn't like that. Sometimes my mother didn't like those lifelines. Like I also had um, I ended up, for whatever reason, the way they had done high school is they had a gym class for freshmen, but I couldn't get into it because it had already been filled for some odd reason. So they
Yeah.
put me in a speech class instead, which I had no idea what that was about. It was really
Mhm.
forensics. So public speaking is kind of the class in forensics as opposed to speak. At first, I thought it was like a speech class. I was like, well, I could speak okay.
Right.
um, but I met this teacher, and she's a very dynamic person, and she was very much about you being allowed to make your own choices
Mm.
and that you were empowered to do that. You didn't have to accept your circumstances the way they were. And she said you could even take this to the extreme, and the fact that all the choices you make, good or bad, you can do as long as you're willing to accept the consequences if they're bad. So it kind of gives you a little bit of ownership on what that is.
Yeah.
And when this was like an epiphany to me at that particular point in time, which is kind of how some of my childhood was uneven. I was a kid who was getting straight A's, but constantly falling in with crowds that are a little rougher or doing things and having behaviors that were not the things that we want to do.
Yeah.
Um, so it was almost almost again, like a paradox.
Yeah.
Because I did start to get good grades along the way. But this teacher, when she told me that, I actually shared that with my mother, and I said, hey, I think um, this is something. This is really cool. And she said, no, that's not true at all.
Mhm.
Um, there are a couple of things that she taught me. The things that she wanted to teach me at the time, because things changed later on that case, was she said, "You're always going to be a slave to your circumstances." Like
Mm.
I never had a choice, even though she had plenty of choices. I never had a choice in my life, and you're not going to have any choices in your life. You're just going to have to accept what comes your way, and that's the way life is.
Mhm.
So the fact that you were completely powerless in this. The other thing she really wanted to teach me at the time was that not only did family not care, but God didn't care, because I was actually raised Catholic
Mhm.
with my grandmother, but that God didn't care, and that religion was really a crutch for people like me, people with problems, because they couldn't handle their own problems. Therefore, they needed a crutch like God to believe in to give them excuses. And that was kind of the way it was framed up. So not only was it about, at first, it was a choice about religion, then suddenly there really was no choice with religion because there was nobody that was going to take me to church or fulfill my spiritual side anyway. Uh,
Right. Right. How unfortunate that a person would want to take that resource, separate you from it when it gives you hope. Even
And
if they don't understand it, why take it? But it is
and
what it
at the
is.
same time, I guess I have to stress too probably the sad part in some ways, and this is how I ended up dealing with it later, and I'll talk more about it later, I suppose. But I think the sad part in the story is the fact that, and it's how I learned to cope with this and forgive her later,
Okay.
is the fact that I think she felt that she was doing the right thing, even though it was 100% the wrong thing. She
Okay.
honestly thought that this needed to be done. I think she believed it almost like a psychosis,
Mhm.
that that she needed to take an iron fist to this kid who didn't even have an identity and help
Mhm.
shape this identity. because not part of the good side in her mind of being a bad kid was maybe people wouldn't push me around, you know,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you know, and that's kind of how I was because throughout this entire time I was not somebody to, I was in fights quite a bit as a kid.
Yeah.
That was part of my answer to everything.
Yeah.
Was to lash out.
What you said just takes a ton of maturity to go back and actually give the other person start seeing the angles that they might have been working with, although it hurt you so much.
Yeah,
The idea that they were doing their best, maybe, maybe this actually, like you said, she believed she was doing her best. And sometimes there tends to be a little bit of relief in there when that happens. It's like, okay, well, it wasn't like a person who knew what they were doing and then was treating me wrong. There was a person who thought this was the way
right.
to do it, and that changes things a little bit,
A
and
little
it
bit. Yeah.
inside you, or you know what I mean,
Yes.
when you're able to evaluate it and you're not giving them the benefit of the doubt, but you're able to kind of like see the other side a little bit and just ponder, at least ponder. You don't have to accept or reject. It's just like, what if? And so I found a lot of relief in that space where I don't have to decide, was this person doing this on purpose or was this right or wrong? It's like just pondering, is there something here? And just kind of like feeling it. And that takes a lot of maturity to be able to
Mhm.
to look back at it like that. And I'm so glad that you're able to do that. That's amazing.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
still unfortunately a pained relationship, and there's some, I don't know if we're
Yeah.
done talking about it or not. There are incidences later in life that this like resurfaces like again and again and again. I mean, this is a pattern, but what I recognized, I think, through this and through forgiveness was the fact that this is her pattern. It has literally nothing to do with me.
Ah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. That's amazing. All right, we're gonna have to touch on that. How did you end up? What was the next part that maybe did you get out of the house and were living alone after that, or what was the next push that kind of kept you growing or kept you moving?
So I kind of was starting to bottom out. There are a couple times I was bottoming out throughout
Okay.
my life. Okay.
Okay.
And I was starting to bottom out again in my junior year of high school. Um, I was actually cast in a one act play and I had to give it up because I didn't have the GPA for a minute. Like I told you, I was getting straight A's, but that wasn't, I was. But then
Right.
that one semester, I was working full time because that was my escape. I was drinking the rest of the time I wasn't working. I wasn't doing my schoolwork. I was staying out as long as I could.
Yeah.
So I was sleeping a lot of times in class and I was taking classes that you really couldn't sleep in, like Algebra 2 Trig
Mm-hmm.
and foreign language and American literature. Those are things you don't sleep in. Like,
Right.
so my
Def-
GPA went from, from middle school was like, I ended up hitting, I was able to coast from Minnesota for a while, 4.0 to like 3. And then in this junior year period, I got a 1.2.
You're in good company, sir. I have experienced
Yeah.
those too. Especially in
Right.
high school, I was like, I don't care about school. And, just because I had finally found something that made me feel better, which was friends, girls,
Yep.
and then drinking on the weekends or whenever we could, to tell you the truth. That became my release, my escape.
And my theater teacher picked up on this where I was getting an F in that class as well.
Hmm.
And she told the speech teacher, the same one that I had mentioned earlier, about the fact that I had this 1.2 GPA. And it was the speech, that teacher, her name actually was Betty Sabo. Betty Sabo made its decision to save me. And it was a very active save. She went and talked. My folks had nothing to do with this. She went and talked to the school, and for that second semester, had me transferred out of the classes that I couldn't possibly do because I had missed too much material.
Yeah.
So I went from the Algebra 2 trig to a remedial, like math of the info age, if you will. Did they teach you how to write a check?
Yeah.
Stuff like
Okay.
that. Um,
Cool.
she took me out of American Lit and put me in as a teacher's aide in a class she already had a teacher's aide in.
Hmm.
My theater teacher gave me an A that I didn't deserve,
Hmm.
um, which was good because I still, without the A, I would have had a less than a 1.2. Like, I was deep in it.
Yeah.
Um, and I was able to pull myself up from there. And what I learned in the second half was that college was my escape. If I
Hmm.
could if I could go to college, I could get out of the house for good.
Right.
And that was it. That was my, or at least for a long period of time. And that was my escape, is I had to find a way to get to college. And so that's what I did that during that time in my senior year. Was I was still drinking a lot. I was still working full time, but I went back to really focusing in on my grades.
Hmm.
And I petitioned my senior year to get into um, an AP composition course to learn to write a little bit better. Because one of the things you get helpers and you get detractors, right? My American Lit teacher told me not to worry about college because I wouldn't be able to get through it anyway.
Right.
She told me I didn't write well enough and I would never be a good enough writer, which, by the way, is my career. Um,
I was about to say, aren't I talking to a
and
writer?
I've also taught at a university, let alone, but my entire career is spent around writing. So you get detractors and you get and all these labels. And I think when you don't have it, because I still didn't have a strong identity. When you get these
Mhm.
labels, you believe them, honestly. When people tell you that you'll never be a good writer, you believe it.
Yeah.
For a long time, it takes a lot for you to start to believe something other than the labels that you embrace. Like you're a bad person, you're going to be an alcoholic, you're going to get into fights a lot. You're a mean drunk. I heard that one, even though I wasn't a mean drunk, but I heard that one a lot.
Right.
All these things, and you start like that becomes your identity.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I lived with for so long. So college, I went there and drank as well, but I was lucky. I got for some reason. Um, my first stop was Whittier College. So
Hmm.
I went to California. That's where Richard Nixon went to school, is sort of a little
Yeah.
trivia piece. And I went to this small private school. Found a grant for me to go there and settled me up with some scholarships. They looked at my GPA. They saw the 1.2 dip and said, you know what? We're not going to hold that against you because we know that there was probably a crisis in your life, and that's okay. And they accepted me. I thought they accepted me based on the idea that I was going to go into psychology,
Hmm.
which kind of I was attracted to. Um, and by the end of that year, even though it was a great program, I learned that I didn't want to be a psychologist.
Right.
So they said, if you're not going to be a psychologist, you're welcome to find a different school.
Oh,
uh,
really? Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So I didn't know what I was going to do. So I thought maybe I could go into, well, actually, they kind of gave me an idea. What I wanted to try to do is they had just started this program for advertising. And I thought, well, advertising would be something that would be really interesting to me, because even as a kid, I was sort of like a storyteller, except I would use pictures. I would do art. A lot of my
Hmm.
art was storytelling. And even when I played, like army men and stuffed animals would have backstories. It was just, so I had this, I already had the storytelling aspect in my life.
Right.
And um, so I thought advertising would be maybe a good fit and I could still hang on to some of the psychology. And so I decided, I wanted to get into the program they had at Whittier, but they said it was only for freshmen. It was going to be a 5-year rigorous program, and that's not you. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do? So I transferred to the state school at UNR, and it was affordable enough within state, no out of state tuition, that I could literally work full time during the summer and while I was at school and make enough money to pay for my way through school. And that's
Awesome.
kind of what I did. I was also a
Cool.
resident assistant for a while. Again, like there's this paradox here where there are many times, like even at the fast food place I originally worked, or then once I was within the university, and maybe it was from, I think later on, I kind of determined it was from the first 10 years. I was constantly being put in these leadership positions, even though it was like a contradiction of what I believed myself was and what I would actually do.
Right.
There was a huge contradiction there. Like I was a
Hmm.
resident assistant guiding other students through college. And at the same time, I was this bad kid going out and drinking all the time.
Right.
Like, okay, that's kind of how I
Double
rolled
life.
through a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then then I ended up making it through college, and I stayed with somebody I was with and ended up coming back to Las Vegas. We were trying to be a little progressive, and I said, whoever gets the best job offer will go there. My job offer was $18,000 in San Francisco, which, even back then was, you're not going to
Well,
make it.
right.
Hers was 36,000 to be a medic in Las Vegas. So we decided to come down here to
Cool.
start during a recession. Uh,
Oh.
yeah. So I couldn't find a job other than
Right.
I ended up getting my summer job back here in Las Vegas for a while. And I just threw myself into work. I thought I had overcome, and this is kind of the interesting thing, Cameron, is I thought I overcame everything at this point. I
Right.
had a big delusion now. I was starting to reframe after I graduated from college. I was trying to rewrite like who I was because I didn't have an identity yet. I just
Right.
went through behaviors. I went through experiences, and I didn't have a sense of who I was. So I started to try to rewrite myself with, in a sense, new labels. I was trying to get rid of the old labels and write new labels, even though, now it was more like if you drank, it was more like Mad Men, right? Like the television show.
Yeah.
To be, even though that wasn't out yet, but that was kind of like the thinking, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of hip and cool, getting, a little tipsy, coming up with some crazy ideas in advertising. But so I worked at a paint store for 4 days a week. And then I tried to start a business for 3 days a week because I couldn't find employment in the field.
Hmm.
And what I found out was is nobody could hire a freelance writer, a copywriter, or even a magazine writer, but they could give you work. So for those 3 days, I would spend doing freelance work.
Oh, cool.
Um, and then I learned that there was so much demand for it that I just worked so much that I didn't need the other job. I was offered the assistant manager position, but I was like, you know what? I think I could just do this. And
Cool.
so I took this leap of faith and started a business. Um, and I was very successful at it. I worked
Cool.
100-hour work weeks though,
Yeah.
and drank a little bit to shave it off.
Hmm.
It's kind of how I went. I was married the first time, and I think it was a combination of the drinking and the long hours that kind of disrupted, and her parents didn't care for me, disrupted that. And actually, my mother, once again, wasn't very helpful in that,
Right. Yeah.
because she would constantly try to insert herself into the relationship by undermining the successes that I was trying to develop.
Hmm.
Which there's something to learn from this part aspect of it too, and um, and what she wanted it to be. So like there was like a little thing like if my ex and I were over at the house, and let's say we had a disagreement about something and went home, my mother would be the first person to call up to make sure she wasn't being abused, even though I had never abused anybody in my life.
Wow.
And even she was like, "Why is she calling to check this?" That never happened. It never.
Yeah.
It
She
was
probably asked you, have you hit on someone before? Like, what's
yeah.
going on here?
So
Why is
when
your
I got into fights, it was with people of same caliber fights, right? I had never hit a
right?
woman in my life,
Right. Yeah. And for your
especially
mom
somebody
to
I was with.
call your
Yeah,
mom to call your wife to see if you had hit her when you never hit a woman before or threatened or anything
I
like
was the
that.
mean drunk.
I'm
See,
so sorry you dealt with that.
so
We
it would creep up like constantly, and I finding myself, and I think it was kind of what I was dealing with at the time, plus some of the, I think, and the person I ended up marrying the first time, I think had her own identity issues given the circumstances that she was raised in, and I think that's probably why we found each other. Plus, we found equal adversaries in her parents, not so much my parents, right?
Mhm.
Because my parents were also still like you could swing with them in a sense, like they were the cool parents, even though they weren't cool. That was like
Right.
the facade. Like everybody was like, "Oh, your parents are always so cool," but they didn't have to deal with the constant undermining, the abuse, and the punishments. So it's easy to say that, you know.
Wow.
So it's
This
kind of like,
parallels
yeah,
us.
there's a lot of parallels. So,
Yeah.
so that ended up not working out, and ironically, I was with. So we decided to get divorced, and when we got divorced, her life started to fall apart. She's the one who filed for the divorce, even so she was on board with it. But then she changed her mind, and her life started to fall apart. So she
Mhm.
couldn't move out right away because she wanted to wait until she had a house built because she was going to move right into a house. And then, so I'm like, okay, I guess we'll live together a little bit longer. And then she lost her primary job, so she couldn't get the house built. And so she was still there, et cetera. And so I was really kind of locked into this weird limbo where I was working and I was still being successful. But it was this weird limbo. Um, and like I don't know, you can't really go out and meet people and say, oh, by the way, I'm living with my ex-wife.
Yeah,
You know,
that doesn't work
we're not
well.
going back to my place because my ex-wife lives there,
Yeah.
or any of that. So that was kind of out. So I ended up stumbling into America Online during this transition period,
Oh,
and
cool.
America Online was like this little dial-up. You would
Oh, I
dial up.
remember it well. Yeah, that was
Yeah, you get
gr
into these chat rooms and just talk with random people. It was kind of like
yeah,
Twitter on like a small scale, right? There were only 24 people in the room instead of 24 million people in the room.
right.
And you just have like random, sometimes they were random conversations. And I ended up meeting somebody on there who lived clear across the country.
Cool.
And that was kind of like a little bit of a blessing. I think this was one of those lifeline moments. And I even got a sign that this was the way to go. Like this crazy sign happened one day. and where I even said I was doing this series for a magazine called The Sweetest Sweets, and so I was literally asking the Lord for a sign because I had a weird agnostic kind of thing going on at the time because like I was raised Catholic, but then it was kind of beaten out of me. And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
but I still had some level of faith, but I did ask for a sign that day, and I was driving to do one of these Sweetest Sweet reviews. And so when I got there, the suite was done up in all these like moons and suns, which was something very unique to
Mm,
what I talked about with this person I was talking to online.
right.
And like it was like an impossible thing. But what made it more impossible was the only reason I was doing that suite was because they changed their mind at the last minute, like 5 minutes before I got there. They had changed the suite I was going to do the review on to this room
Really?
with suns and moons, even though, and I took that as a sign to like, maybe there's something here, you know?
Yeah.
And we went out, I went out and I met her and, actually it was March 17th. It was on St. Patrick's Day. I met her and we just developed this relationship to start. And she ended up moving out, I think it was see if I got my timeline right, the following July after we had met. Yeah.
Cool.
And
Very cool.
ironically, my ex still wasn't leaving. Even though I had somebody else was going to move out, we decided to take this because she was supposed to move out, but she just wouldn't move out.
Right.
So my stepdad actually came in and intervened, and they took all her stuff over to their house.
Really?
Yeah, and she actually lived there for like 2 or 3 years
At your parents' house?
at my parents' house, where my mom and her could talk about what a terrible person I was.
Oh my gosh. That
And that's what they did, and even though we were supposed to end as friends, by the time somebody lives in your parents' house for like 2 to 3 years, it's pretty impossible to be friends with them after that.
Yeah.
We definitely broke it off, even the friendship. I mean, we've had contact like once or twice since then, but, um, I think that was like part of it, but this is part of this, and because she lived there, there was a nice little extra separation, I think, between myself and the family, even though we went over for
Right.
some things, we just wanted to kind of stay away.
Yeah. Very awkward. Very
Very
awkward. But at the same time, it worked for you. Like you just said, it was
It was
another
like one of
thing that,
those little steps, yeah. But one of the
yeah.
things I was doing in my business, and it was really taking off too, especially after this change. It was incorporated in '96, and I was doing like a lot of business, and um, the person that I met online who had become my wife 1 year later, she actually ended up working for me for a while. First, she worked for a bank because that's what she was used to, and then she ended up working for me after we had moved into our house, and we worked together for like a good 10 years. But one of the things that I did, it's like all these like little tells you get along the way when you realize that you haven't dealt with things in the past. Was I would win awards for my work like all the time, but all the awards that I won was never enough. Like I would win awards, but they were never enough ever.
Right.
You need when you think you're the bad person, you need constant affirmation when you're trying to rewrite who you are.
Right.
Because all I was doing was replacing labels. So
Right.
like when we incorporated, it was a big deal to me, and it was starting to break down right away. And I think that was actually another lifeline that came up at that particular point in time. I remember that I was given this, because now I was a corporation, so I had to assume the title president, and it was like a big deal in my head that like a president would somehow be different than who I was like just a month
Y-
before.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
freelance writer. Even though that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it might not make a lot of sense to people, but you end up embracing labels so tightly, especially good ones when you're trying to rewrite yourself. Like,
Yeah.
"Okay, now I'm somebody because I'm gonna be this executive," but it really wasn't different. So, I was having a little bit of a crisis trying to make this transition, and I ended up asking a colleague of mine. I took a leap of faith with him. His name was Keith Sheldon, and he's the first person that really woke me up to this idea of labels.
Hmm.
Um, he said, "You gotta get rid of these labels." He said, Let's start with this one. You don't have to put the pressure of a president on you because the president isn't who you are. A
Yeah.
freelance writer isn't who you are. Those are
Yeah.
labels.
Yes.
And you're Richard Becker.
Yep.
That's who you are." I didn't 100% even know what that meant yet, but that was kind of where he was.
What a good friend.
and mentor. I mean, that's what he did for a living. He was a senior communicator, and he taught me a lot. He actually encouraged me even more with leadership and to shift from just writing to strategic communication, which actually upped my game significantly in terms of value and what I could bring to different clients, during this period of time.
You
Um,
know, I kind of confused labels a little bit too. That's so funny. We like parallel a little bit because so I didn't feel great about myself my whole life. So I was good at sports. I'd receive awards.
yeah,
Not for me. I'd be the captain of the team. Not for me. That sort of thing. But then when I graduated college, I was able to open a business, like a sales company. We were like door to door for Fortune 500 kind of deal. And
yeah,
we were just kind of like the boots on the ground sort of thing. And because I suddenly had this label of like, I own my own business, I did feel a certain way about myself. And the problem is when '08 hit and I closed the company, I didn't know who I was anymore again
right,
because I had embraced that title so closely, like because it was so polar opposite to how I felt about myself.
right,
It's like, I can't be a nobody if this is my title, right? And then I lost the title. So then I lost my ability to see myself as like worthy for a little bit. So
right,
I understand what you're saying. Like those titles, when they're tagged on you as a little kid, they not only do they follow you, but you're trying to replace it with something else. Give me another tag. You just said it so well that you are not a tag. You are not your job. Your identity is you. It's you. And I had to find that too. And that comes with self-love and actual like inner work and patience and actually like wanting the best for yourself compared to just wanting to fix the problem. I know that's a lot, but I'm saying like
no,
that's
it's right on point, Cameron.
it's
Like I had, and in fact, it was almost like I was in some ways two people, which is why I talked to my friend Keith as well, because it wasn't just that. It
yeah,
was the fact that on the exterior, people saw me as this strong leader, creative
yeah,
guy, right? But I was inside, I was just crumbling,
yeah,
to the point where I thought maybe I made a mistake by letting my wife like start working for me because that was a lot of additional pressure. We ended up growing even bigger, but at the time, like I was just crumbling because I was like, maybe this is a mistake. And what if I lose this business? And what if I lose the house? And I'm not this perfect guy because even for her, I was a different person than I was
right,
even for my ex-wife. It was this like I was a new person because I had all these new titles and new things that were going on,
yeah,
but I really wasn't inside.
right,
And that's when he told me, and I actually used this for her too, because she ended up having a couple struggles in her life, and I taught her the same things, because he had taught me this so well. As he's like, you always have to keep in mind too that your wife didn't marry you because she wanted the perfect husband. She married you because you're you,
yeah,
and that's what I mean. That's the labels, like even that, you know.
yeah,
And that, see, when it came back on her, like even I was able to use this for her because once we had our first child, she was really heart set on being the perfect mother. But there's really no such thing. There's no universal definition of what the perfect mother is. We know what
right.
unperfect mothers are like, but we don't know what perfect mothers are like because generally speaking, the kids only want that.
Do you think that childhood trauma of being like you're less than and all that kind of stuff forces you to believe that you need to be perfect?
Oh,
Where
it did because I was constantly, see, that was like the double-edged sword. Like I'm talking to you now about all these things as I recognize as bad, but when I was going through it, I didn't. I recognized it as truth. And I was
right,
constantly going to
yes,
my mother seeking affirmation to say, look what I'm doing now. Give me affirmation.
yeah,
And she would be like, yeah, okay. You know,
yeah. That's like
oh, you graduated from school. Guess what? I'm going to go back to college too.
you're
You know,
kidding.
no, this is
You're
constant.
this okay. So this happens. I've heard this story many
Have you heard that
times.
before? Yeah.
Absolutely. My
She quit
wife's
smoking
mom.
because I quit smoking. When I went back to faith, she went back to faith.
I even
Our
heard
kids
the
and
other
my kids are, like, different, like, she is a grandmother, I don't wanna, like, sell her too like, I'm not trying to, I hope your audience, I hope people will understand I'm not, this isn't sour grapes at all.
right. We're just discussing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
um, but like, my kids, her relationship with my kids and the kids she ended up raising for my sister, because that ended up being a disaster, unfortunately, for my sister, grew
Mm,
her life was kind of really rough. Um and she ended up raising 3 kids from my sister's kids.
Wow.
So and all of them, not actually, none of them talk to her so much today, you know, which is a shame because she kind of needs it, but at the same time, it's almost impossible at
Yeah.
times. Um, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you are doing everything you can to appease her, but there is not going to be any appeasement.
It's so funny the way that relationship works because you keep going back to the same person, trying to almost change their mind, but you almost at some point you realize this person's never going to cheer for me.
Correct.
It's not gonna happen. And I keep hurting myself when I keep going back to this person and expecting a different response or reaction to kind of like the same news. I'm doing well. Well, you know what I mean?
No,
It's an odd thing, and it happens to a lot of people. The episode we have out right now is actually about a woman who was raised by a narcissistic mother, and she didn't understand that's what was happening until later in life because it's not like a one incident thing. It's
no.
like a continuous like pecking of at your self, at that person who's trying to develop, just pecking away at it. Oh, you
Right.
think you're good at sports? No, you're not. Oh, you think you're a good painter? Watch me go paint something else. And
Correct.
I mean, it's like a weird competitive needing that person to be below them for some reason
Always, always.
to
Yeah.
feel good about themselves. And what she had to realize somewhere in there is like she actually came to the realization, and I know this isn't the case for you, but in her circumstance, it was like I realized that my mother actually didn't love me and that she wasn't gonna cheer for me or champion for me, and that, she said, was one of the most terrifying moments in her life
No,
because
actually, Cameron, it's interesting that you say that because this is years later. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to
I
chastise.
know, I
Right
know.
now, she's actually not in a good place, and I do what I can to support that, even though I'm going through my own circumstances right now. But with health wise, but so there was a point where I had reconnected because one of the things she did when I was growing up was when it came to my paternal grandparents is my grandmother had made sure there was some kind of contact and relationship with them, at least cards and things like that and pictures. And she
Yeah.
made my mother promise since I was because my grandmother was still alive when I made this transition, that she would continue that relationship. So
Mhm.
my mother went out of the way to sabotage that relationship. And she did it kind of a sneaky way. So I ended up meeting them because they lived in Arizona. They came up when I was about 14 to meet me, and I had actually never seen them in person since I was like 2 because they had moved.
Right.
And, and they wanted me to come visit them for the summer. And after we were done with that visitation, my mother looked at me and said, "You know what they're going to do to you? They're going to steal you. You're going to go down there for the summer and you'll never come back." And the irony is that's exactly what happened to me with her. And
I
she was
know.
projecting that onto them. And so
Wow.
it really started to disintegrate that relationship where there wasn't a sharing of information. So once my grandmother was done, there was nobody to hold her accountable.
And
And
that's
so
so
flash forward
confusing.
years later,
Yeah.
my I had made contact when my son was 2. I actually searched for these people and I wrote them a letter to say, if you please reach out if you want to be in contact. And if not, I completely understand because it's been so long.
Yeah.
And they called me immediately after receiving the letter. And it was just this joyous relationship for a period of time, but they were older. And then my grandfather, Les, he was actually like a step grandfather. I won't go into the details right now, but he passed, and then it was just her on her own for many years. But then she needed help, so Adult Protective Services in Arizona contacted me and said, "You need to step in and help your grandmother because nobody's really able to do that." And I said, naturally, I will. Let me try to work this out. So by the time I was able to work out, it took a couple months to get an attorney and to figure this out. Like, what steps do I need to do? Um, she had a nephew that decided to intervene because she was sitting on, which I didn't even know, a good amount of bank accounts.
Mm.
So he wanted that. So he stepped in to intervene. So there was an investigation just to try to ferret out whether because the accusations were made that I wasn't really her grandson and all sorts of crazy things like that could be an entire show, Cameron. But
Right.
so I'm not going to go into it. Going back to what I was saying though is so there came a point where I needed my mother. Um, and at the time we had a little bit of a, it was like a softer period of the relationship. We needed her assist to at least write a testimonial for the court, so
Hmm.
that that would be evidence that I would be able to secure the welfare of my grandmother, and move her here to Las Vegas to get her into a home to get her the attention she needed, because she was in her 90s. We're not talking
Right.
about like 70s or 80s. We're talking somebody who Adult Protective Services called me for a real reason.
Right.
And she was sitting right here in the same room that I'm talking to you in right now. And she said, and I showed her the letter. I said, to make it easier for her, I said, why don't you sign this letter? And she read it and she says, I'm not going to sign that. And I said, why not? She goes, well, it paints Les, your grandfather, as like he was a good person and I didn't like him. So I'm not going to sign the letter for that, because I don't want anybody to think that he was a good person, because he wasn't, even though that was not the experience that I had at all.
Wow.
And I'm not going to do that. And I was like, that's like, but I need this in order to save Anita, who you liked. And she said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I said,
Wow.
aren't you going to? And I said, I ended up saying, I go, well, aren't you going to do this as a sense of responsibility? Don't you have any love for her or your family? And she looked at me and said, no, I don't even know what love is. And
Wow.
my wife was there and she said, you don't love Rich? And she was like, no.
Wow.
And unfortunately, during the court battle, because it was extended over this, my grandmother ended up not making it. She passed before we actually had the final trial.
Wow. I'm so sorry.
And that
And
ends up
your
shaking you
wife
up,
was
right?
do what?
That shakes you up, because that's like another
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah. And that's a human being getting in the way of helping another human being. And then, so it's like there's that basic thing that's happening, but then it's like there should be more of a connection since we're family. And then for your mother to say, I don't know what love is,
And
a-
I don't love anybody.
and I don't love anybody. Maybe that was one of the most truthful things she ever said. It was like a spontaneous utterance and it just came out, just
It
like,
might have been. And something like
I'm
that, like, happened when the same thing happened when I actually did forgive her, because I forgave her in person at
awesome.
one point.
Awesome.
And this was before that happened. It was like in between. It was actually in my 30s when I was going through a life crisis, because all this was coming together. And I actually found out how gaslit I really was, because I had talked to family members and reconnected with them, and everybody was telling me, like, I started to piece together a truth. And
Uh-huh.
I understand that everybody has different perceptions of what is. But at the same time, there was like their truth seemed to kind of coalesce. And then this other truth that I always believed was completely false. And I realized, like, my half my life I had lived, in a sense, I felt like I lived a lie,
Yeah.
because nothing that I was told was truthful.
Right.
And that was like really mind blowing to me. And I think that like that's the impetus of getting out. I think that's what it was like the first step. The second step was when I was diagnosed with cancer the first time. The first step was, I had those other like little lifelines that helped me to get to a point. So they're like small steps, but then this moment in time where I was in crisis was, you know, definitely the wake up call that I needed. And I realized how much I was gaslit, and I was like, I don't even know. I really said to myself, I don't know who I am. I really don't. And so I went over to her house and I had a conversation with her, and I forgave her. I forgave her for everything. I said, I forgive you for everything. I said, but going forward, we have to have a different kind of relationship.
So what took you to that? What, like, let's go to that, because that's a huge moment, because I would imagine you're not forgiving her so she feels better as much as you're forgiving her to move on.
Right.
Is that a appropriate statement?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how did, because that's an important shift, because you're going from seeking from this person to acknowledge how you're feeling to actually saying, no, I need to be careful here.
Right.
You eventually reach a point where you're like, I have to be careful. What led you though to want to give that forgiveness to her? What was the main kind of like motivation or feeling behind that? So we could help somebody else who's struggling with forgiveness.
Sure. Briefly, just to understand, I was at this particular juncture, I was at an extreme crisis. Okay.
Okay.
Which is, my wife was really having issues that weren't, they were like biological issues that were manifesting into behaviors,
Okay.
because she had taken a birth control pill that was later taken off the market
Hmm.
and also doing a no carb diet, which
Okay.
is a disaster. Right. So I was having tremendous issues right in my own household at the time.
Really?
In addition to that, my sister, who I tried to make sure stayed out of drugs, got very deep into drugs.
Okay.
And speaking of which, I briefly, um, when I was in college, I pointed out that she was getting into drugs, and I had told her, actually, to her, my sister, I said, if you continue down this path, I'll have to disown you. It was an empty threat, but that's what I said. And what she did is she went and told my mother. And so my mother called up like 15 minutes later and said she was going to disown me and didn't believe me that my sister would ever do drugs. So flash
Wow.
forward to this crisis moment. So my sister was really struggling with a meth addiction
Okay.
and had unfortunately been involved in a crime where they stole the public works vehicle and were caught and was facing a 10-year felony.
Yeah.
And at the time, I had friends that were in the DA, and I also knew a public defender, and I actually got them together to try to rescue her if she was willing to go through a special addiction program to get her out, or
Right.
she'd just be put on probation.
Yeah.
And she, of course, couldn't pass a couple drug tests, so ended up back in jail. And so I had that conflict. So because of that was going on with my sister, my mother decided that I was the bad guy because I should have never convinced my sister to take the deal because there was a good chance she would have gotten off,
Hmm.
which isn't true because they were going to use her as she wouldn't give up the other party. It was, unless she gave up the other party that was involved, she was going to go to jail for 10 years.
Right.
So I was the bad guy for that. So I had, in a sense, the three closest women in my life at the same time were all trauma points. So of course that threw me into, kind of a tailspin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
And
it
then
make you question yourself? Because a lot
I
of times
questioned
when
everything. I questioned my sanity. I questioned whether I wanted to be alive. I questioned everything.
that continues to be a recurring theme when we hear these stories. It's like there are periods of time where you're so confused by what you're being fed by these people as you start questioning your own reality or your own worth, or like, am I misremember? Like you actually go back inside. You're like, am I screwed up here? And a lot of
You
times
go
you'll end up
back to
talking to someone else.
you
Yeah.
go back to the old labels. You go back to
Yeah.
things like my father committed suicide. Why, maybe he did that. Maybe I should commit suicide. That's where you go. I'm a bad
Yeah.
person. I was always a bad person. This
Yeah.
moment in time where I did all these successful things, that's not real. What's real
Yeah.
was that I was a horrible person that got a little bit lucky.
And when you label yourself a horrible person, suicide actually it's a weird thing when you get to that door, because it actually becomes more of a benefit to the world. Since you are such a problem and so many people have told you that you're worthless, fine, let's do it. I'm done. And I've been there, you know what I mean? Like so many people tell you that you're worthless, you start believing it, you believe the lie. And then it makes suicide, when you get to that door, it makes the door crack open a little bit further because you're like, everyone else has told me, you know what I mean? Like, and you just start regurgitating these things that you've been fed and start questioning your own sanity. I didn't mean to cut you off,
No,
but
you're fine.
it's,
I
yeah,
appreciate the dialogue. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, there's a
it's
lot of pieces here sometimes too. So I'm trying to be careful not to get too lost in the story. But
100%,
you know,
100%. So let's
so
keep,
yeah, so you had asked me, so I needed you to understand that, I think, for the next part, which is I happened to, and it was because I was finding all at the same time having all these revelations, talking to family members about how much I was gaslit on top
yeah,
of all this other trauma that was going on at the same time. So like this was like a trifecta. It was like a perfect
yeah,
storm, if you will.
got it.
And then one of my aunts suggested, and I'm not saying this is the end all to go start, okay? But
Mhm.
she recommended Beyond the Dream by Thomas Hora,
Okay.
which is a meta psychiatry book. And it talks about like how we choose to see the world directly influences how we feel. And that
Yes.
really caught on. That was like a stepping stone. That was actually the first time beyond just advice that I was given like a concrete tool to consider. And I really have started to absorb that book. And I think the answer isn't the book. The answer is what it launched me on was almost like a spirit quest,
Yeah.
if you will. So the trauma was still going on, and I had lost like 30 pounds within a 3-week period. That's how much it was
Whoa.
like impacting me physically. So I went from 190 to like almost, yeah, to about 160.
Dang.
Yeah. And for me, I'm a 6-foot guy. So that's crazy.
Dang. Oh, no.
So it was definitely manifest. And at the same time, I'm trying to keep my business afloat because it was suffering as well.
Right.
Um, and I went on the spirit quest, and that, that was like, that was like a big life-changing moment that set me up to handle all the traumas that would follow,
Mhm.
so much. And I think that was like the biggest, and I wasn't done. I mean, I still had a lot of healing to do, as I'd find out. Every time you think that you're fixed you find out that there's still some stuff to tap and you have to dig a little deeper. Uh,
Even when you let go, like I would let go of a resentment and I'd figure I'm done. I finally let it go. And it turns out there was all these emotions waiting at the door, ready to run into my head once that had actually left the room. It's like an ongoing process.
And then I read Ask the Awakened by We Woo Wee, and on Having No Head by Douglas Harding. And each one of these are almost, and some people might call them pop psychology, but each one of these had like a piece. Like even the philosophy of Andy Warhol had a piece to me. Like Andy
Mhm.
Warhol was actually great. Like one of the things he said in his one of his books, The Philosophy of Andy Warhol, I really loved because he said, I'm not going to use his language, I think, but unless I should, but no, he
Mhm.
said, okay, so what your mom, I'm paraphrasing. So what your mom abused you, you lost your dog, your wife cheated on you. I'm not saying my wife did, but you
Mhm.
had all these bad things happen to you. So what?
Right.
So what? And I was like, well, that's kind of freeing. Like, oh, I could just say that. The past doesn't have to dictate who I am anymore. Like I
Yeah.
can be a product of my behaviors now as opposed to the product of the behaviors of the past or
Whoa.
experiences that I had. And that
Yeah.
was all part of the spirit quest. And then I think that the extra caveat to it is when I was studying some Buddha, and um there's this thing that Buddha said, and he just said, and I don't know why it worked for me, and I'm not saying it would work for other people, but for me, it was just this weird coalescence of everything. Because I was studying like lots of different spiritual works along the
Mhm.
way, trying to find answers of life to have it make sense in this point of trauma. Like, how am I going to survive if I'm going to survive?
Right.
Um, and Buddha had said, he said, when you really think about it, um, nothing is there. Nothing is there. And what he means by that, to a sense, actually has a little scientific connotation, because if you drill down past like the cells, you actually find out there's more nothing in the universe than there is something.
Mhm.
But then he said, that nothing is something, and that something is love.
Mm.
And when I read that, some people would be like, wow, where do you go with that? And for me, what it triggered was that love was Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what hit me. And I thought, all this time I had been agnostic, and I was missing this piece that's so important. I mean, maybe people could find different solutions in other places, but I don't, for me, I had been, ever since my time with my grandmother, I was missing any real spiritual direction.
Mm.
And that kind of helped ground me to know that it helped me in a couple ways. One, I had family members that really reinforced this idea, because I wasn't sure anymore that nobody got rid of me as a child. I was loved. My grandmother loved me. She had unconditional love, which is
Mhm.
rare. I've experienced it twice in my life. Once with that and once with my wife. With my grandmother, my wife, that's it, you know? Every other love that I've experienced was conditional. And that's like really powerful stuff. But the other place
Yeah.
you get that is with Jesus Christ. That's unconditional love.
Yeah.
That's what he offers us. That's what he grants us. And so I didn't have to feel so alone in the world. I recognized that he was kind of walking with me. And that actually helped shape my life, not only my life, but I ended up shaping my wife's life as well, especially once we had, after this crisis, that my son weathered, as a young child. He doesn't remember a lot of it, fortunately, but maybe it is there, right? And it wasn't horrible, horrible. Like I know
Right.
people who had really horrible stuff. It was about 8 month period. And when we had a daughter, like shortly after we reconciled everything and fixed everything, and she was got off the medication because so much of it was biologically driven.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was my household was healing. That household, the other household that I told you, the trifectas, I didn't have a choice. I had to cast them away for a while.
Yep.
I just said, I need to work from and this is where I got this too, from just taking this, like maybe being touched by grace, is that I knew I had to work from the inside out,
Hmm.
and I had to fix myself.
Hmm.
And then I had to fix my family, or my marriage. And then I had to fix my family, like immediate first, and grow from the inside out. And that's
Yep.
always been a part of my mantra ever since. Um, then my wife was pregnant, and um, which was very unexpected. And she didn't even know she was pregnant for a while. She
Hmm.
was 3 months pregnant, but because of the birth control, she had been irregular, so she didn't equate it to anything. That's the only reason she didn't know. Like people go, like, "How do you
Right.
not know?" That's how you don't know, right? You're irregular anyway.
Yeah.
And so she found out 3 months, when she was 3 months pregnant, that she was 3 months pregnant. And then our daughter came 3 months later, which is 6 months, not 9 months,
Wow.
and spent the next
So,
3 months in NICU and barely survived. And it was so fortunate that I was already on this direction, because if I wouldn't have been, I would have not been able to deal with that particular trauma of having a child in NICU who
wow.
honestly was touch and go like every other day. That's a roller
Really?
coaster ride I hope nobody ever has to experience, you
Yeah.
know? Um, and, there we were, and we had no choice, but in a sense to say, Jesus, or God, take the wheel,
Hmm.
because you really don't. And what
Right.
will be, and you had to learn that. And then, of course, the second time I learned it was later on when was diagnosed with cancer. Was once again, it was another pivot point in my life where that one, I think that's when I learned, from the period of my daughter being in NICU to the time that she was that age and I was faced with cancer, was the first time in my life that I actually looked back. And this was like, I think now it's been 13, 14 years ago, but I looked back and I said, I was, despite the hardships, I was satisfied with what I did with my life. I'd done some amazing things, and how all these I'm not going to get into them now, but I had done these things, and I had two wonderful children, and I had this great marriage, and I had a grandmother who loved me, and my daughter would eventually go to, we put her in a private Lutheran school, um, to start her off, as opposed to the public school. My son wanted to stay with public school, so he did that. But
Right.
but so we started to become a little bit more involved, spiritually and as Christians, you know?
Yeah.
Even though she didn't even know. She was also a Gnostic, and she had never been a Christian before either. And I think this was like a real big awakening for us, in the fact that we could have this, like, life that was, like, a little bit better, and it's actually helped us because there were other traumas that would come up later,
Hmm.
that that Jesus has been with us through the entire time. Just
Yeah.
not in a direct way, not, I'm not asking for signs or miracles, but just to say, just for us to know that it's okay. And I think
Yeah.
that's what it was with cancer, was in a sense, I know ultimately, right, where we don't make the judgments, but you do judge yourself a little bit. And I think the first time was diagnosed with cancer, I was able to say, yeah, I did. I want more time, but I did enough. And I'm okay with what happened. I'm okay with that. My journey wasn't easy, and that's okay.
Hmm.
You know, and
Yeah.
maybe some things I did were horrible because I was a horrible person, you know, but but it's okay.
You're a person.
I'm a person, and I
Yeah.
came through it, and I don't have to pay it forward,
Yeah.
which is also really important. I mean, the childhood my children have are vastly different than the childhood I have. I mean,
Yeah.
like vastly different. And we have a
Good.
really we're a very tight family. You know, like spending time together. We take trips together. We do things together every Christmas. They're my daughter's in college right now, and my son is graduated in college, and he has a successful career in Reno, Nevada. But every Christmas, we're together for sure.
Hmm.
Like there's nowhere else they want to be.
That's amazing.
And we're open and we share. And even when they have missteps or doubts or struggles, they know they can come here and have conversations with us because we're not going to judge them. We're going to
Like,
talk them through it. That doesn't mean we're not going to be tough.
right. But they trust you. That's the big thing
They
is they
trust us.
trust you. They can
Even when
come
that's
to
not what they
you.
want to hear.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Because
like my
people who love
son,
you tell you
yeah,
the truth.
yeah,
They tell you the truth. If someone's just telling you, oh, it's going to be okay, don't even worry about it.
yeah.
Sometimes it's because they don't have the answer and they don't feel like sharing that. So it's
And to let them know
amazing.
too that if you get through this, it might sound cliche, but you will be a stronger person afterwards if you navigate it.
Yep. 100%. The things that we think are going to take us out, the things that we are going to be defined by, if we let it, there's growth, there's opportunities. And when you've seen the darkness, you can greater appreciate the light sometimes, because if you haven't
Absolutely.
experienced the time in the dark, you don't have any way to understand that, like, I haven't taken a substance. I'm not like losing my mind. Like I'm not doing anything but leaning into faith, something that I had no concept of before personally myself. And now when I do it, I actually feel better. There is traction to it. You know what I mean? Although I can't see it, although I can't pick it up and put it in your face and say, this works, man, does it work. And you only get it when you lean into it and when you experience it and when you go through hard times and you say, whatever happens, I trust you. Like to have that moment where you can just release the result of whatever's going to happen to, a greater, higher power and just kind of have that comfort of, I know that you're in control and you're able to kind of walk through it that way, man. You can walk with strength that doesn't even belong to you.
I don't normally share this, but this is like one of those interesting things too, where it is true. Ironically, just before I knew there was a medical issue going on, but we didn't know what it was yet. And we went to church, and um, when I came back, I had caught something at church, and it was bad. Like I was very sick.
Okay.
You know, I was so sick that, and at the time, unfortunately, I was still a smoker, and um, I was so sick and so cold and got the chills so bad from being sick that I got to church that um, it was a choice of excruciating pain to go get that cigarette or just to lay in bed and just try to go back to sleep.
Yeah.
And I ended up going back to sleep. And by the time I was well enough to realize what was going on, I started to say, I just went 24 hours without a cigarette. And I wonder how long I can go without a cigarette. So I never really quit. I just stopped. I
Yeah.
just stopped. And it was because I got sick. It was kind of weird. So I'm not saying that Jesus made me sick so I could give up cigarettes, but and I recognize that, correlation isn't causation, right? But at
Right.
the same time, there's something to this idea that what's crazy is, that was in December. And by January, I was diagnosed with cancer. So I had my survival rate because I was 6 months, by the time I had surgery, it was 6 months after I had stopped smoking. My ability to recover was exponentially better.
Wow.
So if I wouldn't have quit in December, like stopped, I would have had real struggles because of the ventilators and things like that, like 6 months later.
Yeah. Again, perfect timing.
It was
Per-
perfect timing.
and it's just like it's happening. And once you crack the door on like, okay, I see you, Jesus, or I see you, God, or I see the miracles, it's like you question, what have I missed?
Yeah.
Like, how many things have I actually missed? And how do I keep my eyes open in the moment, in the present, to see these things or be used? You know what I mean? Like the idea of being used, just being just being present in your moment during the day so that if you encounter someone who needs help or something like that, you're able to help. It's just such an amazing thing the way that that works. And like you said, that I'm not sure exactly what you said, but you said something to the effect of like our mental well being affects the rest of the world around us. And the way I'm trying to say it is like, if I feel good inside and I love myself, the world looks like a much more pleasant place. If
Absolutely.
if I'm hating myself and I feel shame, the world seems dark and cold.
Yeah.
But the change doesn't actually, the world doesn't change. It's in here. It's in your mental state. And that's when that personal growth, it's all happening up here. It's all happening kind of like in your heart, in your soul, in your mind. And as you grow, the world changes
You
from
will
your
find
perspective.
you will find what you seek, right?
Yeah.
Like even going out into the world, like there's people, especially now with social media, where they actually go out looking for arguments to get a dopamine fix, right?
Yeah.
But they do that, but why are they seeing all these bad things in the world? Why are they getting into all these arguments? It's because they're literally looking for that. But if
Yeah.
you can actually takes a little finesse, but you can actually have social media experiences with very positive, upbeat people if
Yeah.
that's what you choose to find, you know?
Yes.
And then when you have faith, like grounding yourself, even if you don't talk to it, because I recognize some people are atheists. I'm not afraid to talk about faith, of course, but some people, are atheists. So I'm sympathetic to them. I don't want to feel
Yeah.
like I'm preaching to them.
Right.
But then
These
it
are just
gives
our
you,
paddles. That's the way we say
yeah.
it. This is what worked for you. So this is your paddle. And if it works for someone else, that's great. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
And it actually helps you in other ways too. Like, I wouldn't have been able to write my first novel without being able to recognize because although Brady Wilkes, the main character, isn't the character in Third Wheel, right?
Hmm.
It isn't me. He has a lot of my life experiences that I gave to him as sort of
Hmm.
his foundation, including like the grandmother and some of the relationship with his mother. I wouldn't have had this without faith. I wouldn't have had the strength to write that. Or
Hmm.
even more poignantly, I suppose, I wouldn't be able to come on this show and talk about it. That
Right.
was not me. Like back when I was just strictly this successful guy, the idea that I would come on a show and talk about vulnerabilities, perhaps people would see him that way, was an impossibility because I couldn't be that guy. I
Yeah.
can't be that person. I can't have vulnerabilities. I can't let people know that I have this or that. And sometimes, and so you give strength like two different ways. You get the strength to come out and do that, but you also get the strength where if somebody pushes back on you or tries to exploit those vulnerabilities, you can deal with it because you're much more stronger person.
Yeah.
And I even
Yeah.
had this the other day where I did get into a disagreement with somebody online. And because they know I had cancer, they said, "What do you care anyway? You're a dead man walking."
Wow.
Yeah, I know. That's welcome to the net today. And
Jeez.
and that's fine. And that was fine because because I just forgave them and moved on. I was going to have that kind of connection.
I mean, that really shows where their mental state is.
But it
You know what I
didn't
mean?
have,
If
yeah,
Yeah,
it
if
didn't have the impact on me that they thought it did
right, right.
because I have internal strength.
Yes. And you know who you are.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
And I want
Talk
to help
about
people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about full circle. Man. And I bet you could talk for hours even more on this. Like it's just there's so much going on and it's addictive once you cross that barrier where you're able to like open up and be like, if you're there, show yourself to me. And then things start happening. And then like you go through incidents like I had been shot. Had just gotten out of the hospital and my wife's office, she was the only one working at this time, got closed in St. Louis. Like she got fired and she went straight in there and said, I can't get fired. We have to have medical coverage. What is there available? And they said, well, you could, if you were up for it, you could move to Atlanta. We got a promotion for you there, but you got to be there in the next 30 days working. And we decided like God's doing for us what we can't do for ourselves. We can either push back against this and it could
Yeah.
destroy us, or we can go with it. So we sold our house, we got our moving truck, we did all those things. We got an apartment without even seeing the inside,
Wow.
and we moved. And it ended up being one of the best things that could possibly happen for me. Because when I was in St. Louis after I got shot, there was tension in the air. And when I got down to Atlanta, I had someone hold the door open for me. And I literally bladed off thinking that they were about to like do something to me. And I was
Yeah.
like, what do you want? They're like, nothing. I'm just holding the door. Now I get to hold the door for whoever. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's just been such an amazing blessing to have been given the opportunity to be in a different environment and interact with people and open back up. And, it's hard to do that. When people have hurt you and you close up, it's hard to open back up. It is, you know what I mean? And you have to do it with faith. And it's sometimes a very slow process. But when you let yourself, you find out there are good people still in the world,
Right.
and that there are people to connect with, and that there are good things happening, and that, yeah, there's things to
There's
do.
This is a myth, but and part of it is, although it's a little bit of a myth, but some of it's not a myth. But in the Bible, the myth part is that uh, Jesus says, or the Bible says, "Do not be afraid," like 365 times, one
I
for
know.
each day. You've heard that before, so it's
Yeah.
not really that many, which is the myth part. But that's okay. It helps us remember because it
Yeah.
does say it a lot. Be not afraid, and that's something you have to carry with you. That's why you can go on these shows and talk, and you can be open, and even if people attack, I don't have to be afraid.
Right.
Like the person who made that comment to me online, it doesn't mean anything to me, because what matters to me is the relationship I have with myself and with Jesus and my family and the people that I care about. That's what matters.
And once you have that, you then go back to that comment that was left, and you're like, this isn't a reflection of me. This is a reflection of how this person feels about their life or their circumstances, and they're looking to hurt somebody so they feel better about themselves. This has actually not much to do with me. It
No.
happens on our podcast. We put these posts up and everything like that. And we're talking about narcissism this week, and someone went on there and put on like 2-paragraph things saying like, oh, here's this BS about everyone's a narcissist and blah, 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 blah. And all I said was like, thanks for the information. You should listen to the whole episode. Because I mean, they haven't even like listened to the whole thing. And I'm probably talking to a narcissist,
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
a reflection. It's a reflection of who they are, not me,
Right.
So it's like, thumbs up. Thanks so much.
And then you end up meeting, I think, stronger caliber of people. You meet people who are going through the same journey, or you end up coming together with people who are like-minded, and it just sort
Yeah.
of naturally happens that way, regardless of where you are. And
Yeah.
then, and then your whole life just becomes better, even if you're faced with more and more crises or
Yeah.
traumas, because you're stronger, for it. And we did. The last 6 years have been really uh, tough for our family, because we had a house break-in. We lost a family member. We lost a family friend. We lost my stepdad. Then my mother she ended up having a stroke, and because of the relationships that she had with the other people she raised, I was the only person that was even willing to do it, even though I was probably, when you think about it, the uh, least appropriate person to pick, because she only raised me 8 years, and it wasn't great.
Yeah.
Not all of it was bad, mind you. I mean, I
No,
did.
that is like, if you look at that from a way overhead view and look at the whole story of you and your mother, what an incredible part of the story where the child is now the caregiver of the mother, showing the love that to the mother
Yeah.
that he didn't receive himself.
To to a degree, unfortunately, I we had to put so it worked for a while,
Yeah.
and it worked for actually months. So I actually helped her. I sold her house. I helped her move into a assisted living facility that she needed, because she this is her second stroke, and it was a major stroke.
Okay.
And but she ended up having caregiver resentment, and so she started to attack me again, like
Really?
in little ways, in small peckish ways, and in a little bit more direct ways.
Mhm.
But what we've done, because I'm not going to give up on her, I don't think it's the right thing to do. Not from just a son mother kind of thing, or that because I'm the oldest child or anything like that. It's really about the fact that I think, somebody has to do something. So fortunately, she has a couple of people in place that are actually helping her do some of the day-to-day stuff, but I go in and check on her. And if she's unconscious, I'm the person to make medical conditions. She does not want me to have power of attorney, because she doesn't trust me,
Okay.
even though I'm probably the biggest person she could trust in her life, but she
Right.
does not trust me, and that's okay. I probably not the best person to be her POA, but it does come full circle in the sense that We've been there for her, and I have some medical things that prevent me from going to visit her all the time. And I have to, what we had to do is we had to put a little bit of guardrails on it after
Yep.
she kind of switched again. And we do that by, I visit her a little bit less, but I do visit her. And I always bring somebody with me because she's much more inclined to try to attack me if there's somebody with me.
Yeah.
It
Better to
becomes
have
a
a
little
witness.
more peckish, you know.
Yeah. Better to have a witness.
In a way, it's not
Yeah.
even so much a witness. It kind of just diffuses the situation because she doesn't want them to see her that way.
Right.
But if
I
they're not
understand.
there, then she feels free to. Then it'll be like, oh, why don't you like so and so or so and so? You know, she starts to craft these illusions about like maybe I judge a niece or a nephew, and I don't. I mean, I
Right.
just don't. I don't have that. It's not even within me to
Right.
have any thought. They're all living their the best lives they can, and in some cases they're struggling. But that's not my, you know, if
Right.
they needed help, I would help them. But if that's not my business to judge them, and that's just not how I roll. You
There you
know.
go. There you go. Well, Richard, this has been an absolute pleasure. You've changed my day for sure. I am
Well, thank you.
so happy that you came on here, and we're definitely, as long as we help one person, we're doing the right thing.
I think so.
I am going to put all your information in the bio of the episode. So anyone listening, you can reach out or contact Richard or get his books or whatever you want to do to get more information about Richard. We'll have it on there. So check it out. It will be in the bio. And besides that, Richard, again, thank you so much. Can't wait to talk to you again. And until then, take care.
Thanks, Cameron.
What stands out about Richard's story is how long it can actually take to realize that the way you saw yourself growing up doesn't have to be the way you see yourself forever. Childhood experiences can shape the lens you see life through, but they don't have to define what comes next. Healing isn't about forgetting the past, it's about no longer being controlled by it. Thanks for spending this time with us on Shit Creek Survivors, and we'll see you in the next one.